My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I've spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the DTD Podcast. Man, I know I say it a lot, but I'm super excited about tonight. In the studio, a retired senior chief with over 21 years in the U.S. Navy. He spent 20 of those years with SEAL Teams 1, 5, and 3. He has deployments to the Philippines, Iraq, Afghanistan, and numerous other spicy locales. An expert in explosives, he coordinated over 10,000 explosive breach entries in his career. Now he spends his time with his charity, Tier 1 Outdoors, which provides hunting and fishing opportunities to military and law enforcement that gives them the rest that they need so that they can go back and be the family member or friend that they know and they are known to be. Additionally, he coaches girls' youth rugby, and he strives to give future generations the help they need to become the leaders of tomorrow. Please welcome a father, Navy SEAL, coach, and someone I am proud to call my friend, Dave Winkley. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm great. I'm so happy to be here and ready to get this going. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here, man. You have such an interesting career, and not just because of the job that you did, just the way you went about it, getting it done, and just the different places that it's taken you and how it's taken you there. Because I think you would agree, you and I talking, you have taken some side roads back onto the main road and just kind of all over the place and still continuing to get every single thing you set out to do done.
Absolutely. I've been extremely fortunate just to be able to pursue the career that I had and all the different opportunities it gave me throughout my life. Some good, some bad, but that's what creates us in the end.
And when we were talking, we talked about early life. So you were born in Kansas, you moved to Huntington Beach, California, then you moved to Plano, Texas, and you kind of moved around. Now, do you think at all that, I won't say nomadic lifestyle, because that's not a ton of moves, but do you think that kind of helped you out in your career, having that military nomadic lifestyle?
Yeah, 100%. I've just had a family friend the other day. They had to move to Texas from here in California. And one of their younger girl was upset. She's one of my rugby players. And I was like, the best thing I think in my life, not the best, but one of the better things was that we moved around. It forces you to find friends and create, you have to be able to pick up and move places and just, create a new lifestyle wherever you are. And that's what the military does. You're constantly moving, constantly, meeting new people, and you have to be able to forge relationships wherever you are, whether they're with Afghans, with Iraqis or Yemenis or whoever it is. You have to be able to forge a friendship, quote unquote, to be able to get your mission done.
Yeah, and I think even to take that a little further, I think you have to be able to forge friendships quickly too, especially if you're moving around. Like if they just moved now, they're coming right back into the last semester of school. Everyone's kind of set in their ways. And if they're coming from California to Texas, it's going to be definitely a different world down here, whether that be in going to school, going out in public. It's handled a little differently here than it is in California. So I think that's going to really expose them in more than one way, saying it's going to expose them to a lot of different stuff here.
Yeah, for them, it could be a culture shock, but I swear they weren't real Californians anyway. They had Texas in the heart in the beginning. So I think when they get there, they're going to find a home real quick.
Do you think that you're Texan at heart, or do you think you're a Californian?
Oh no, not a Californian at heart at all. It's sad, and I hate to admit it, especially here in a public venue, but I've lived in California longer than I did in Texas, but I still call it home. And, when I talk to some of my buddies back home, I talk to Marcus and Morgan, they're like, when are you coming home? And that's still what it is to me, but I don't know if I'll ever make it back there.
Yeah. You and I had talked about being here and just the different way that it's looked at. But I would even say that I think Texas is losing a little bit of that too. This whole, I think, culture has kind of shifted, whether it be California, Oregon, Texas. It hasn't been as extreme here in Texas, but I think it's definitely, the world has seen a change in culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the past, several years with the pandemic and everything else. I mean, it's quite the odd times to be living. I tell my daughter that as well. I'm like, this is a strange period. This isn't the normal thing. Everything's kind of turned on its head. Public perception of our government officials and what they're telling us. I mean, there's a lot of different things to go down numerous rabbit holes on, but it's not the same life just 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, speaking of Morgan, he's now running for office, and I think he wants to kind of bring back what you and I are talking about. I think he wants to bring that non-political politics back to government.
Yeah, absolutely. He'd probably be a very good candidate to do that exactly.
And I think that there is I want to say there's 5 or 6 retired SEALs that are running for offices from all over the United States. It's a pretty big organized campaign to get some of the stuff that we have in Washington out and this new kind of generation in.
Yeah, I love it. Getting America's war fighters that have seen it and they've been there and they understand what's important in life, and then getting them into a position of in Congress or Senate or whatever it is, just to bring a modicum of reality to their life in Congress. Or the people have been there for decades upon decades. They don't know what real life looks like.
Well, and let's go into that a little deeper. When we talk about that, what do you think that they're going to bring different to the government? I think you and I kind of have the same idea of what they're going to bring, but like you said, those war fighters that know what it's like. But when they're coming in and they're new and they really haven't learned how to navigate DC yet, because like you said, they're war fighters, they're not politicians. I think you would agree they have a big wave to overcome as they insert themselves into that.
They have a bureaucratic issue to overcome, and that would probably be the hardest part. And different thoughts. I've thought maybe I'd do that one day, just to be able to bring some of my leadership to that, and just that thought of the bureaucracies and the committees and trying to move something through, and then the inner politics, in between your own party and against the other party. Unfortunately, it's just the bureaucratic nonsense seems to be the hardest part. Now I'm hoping Morgan and a guy named Brady Duke out of Florida is a good buddy of mine, and I'm really hoping they'll be able to overcome that bureaucratic process and not just kind of get sucked into all of the nonsense and what is the swamp.
Yeah, and I agree. And when I look at it even more, you have a couple of guys, but then you get guys, that we have from say Texas, like Dan Crenshaw. Mm-hmm. He takes a lot of heat for decisions that he makes, and so I think that he, like these other guys, has the problem of people look at them and think they should always vote in a certain way, talk to certain people, only do things certain ways. And so they've kind of got that double-edged sword of where they get stabbed on both ends of it, because people don't think they're doing exactly what they should. And then the other side thinks that they're too aggressive or that they are taking the wrong measures. And so, they kind of get hit from every direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan has a very unenviable position that he's in. A lot of SEALs are very critical of him. I've worked with him before. We're not personal friends or anything, but I've put him through training when he lost his eye. He's trying to go back through CQC, and he's a fighter. He is determined. He's extremely intelligent. But he gets, like you said, he gets a bad rap from ultra conservatives. Like, oh my God, he voted on a red flag law. But he had rationale behind that. It was a tactical move on his side to be able to get other laws, either revoked or not passed. I can't recall what the situation was, but he has some strategy in there. And I just hope he isn't falling into what is the swamp and kind of backsliding from what his morals are. I don't think he is. He's not that kind of guy, but he does get a lot of heat from just about everybody.
Yeah. And I think and looking at Morgan and the man you mentioned, I think that it's going to be the same thing for them. It's going to be the same kind of trouble for them.
Absolutely. And I think Brady Duke's going to do very well out of Florida. He's a, strong Christian man, very strong moral fiber. He's the guy you want there. He doesn't have an ounce of sliminess in him. He is just too good of a man.
Yeah.
So very
you talk about Florida. I mean, they've got a governor that, he's kind of like the Texas governor. He doesn't really care what people think either. He's going to do things the way he's going to do them. And it's kind of refreshing to see it, because I feel like, and it happens all the time. The pendulum swings both ways, but I feel like we, had those 4 years, and now we're swinging so hard in the opposite direction to get away from that it's going to lead to trouble sooner or later.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just this massive polarization that we have going on or maybe it's perceived polarization. Maybe I think that's probably, if you talk to everybody, through your travels or through your podcast or through your current job, I don't think we're as bifurcated as we think we are.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I completely agree with you.
I think that's the glimmer of hope that we have, is that we're not quite so divided as a nation. We just appear to be divided. And I think when we get down to brass tacks, we have a lot more in common than we don't. I was really hoping the pandemic might actually bring us together, kind of like a 9/11 sort of scenario, where it's like, hey, we all have to get on board. But then it turns so political, and it fractioned again. It's like whether you follow the science or you're a Fauciite or whatever it's going to be. It's just it fractured us into even more smaller splinters.
It's funny that you mentioned 9/11, because I want to talk about that. Now, all through your early life, you were obsessed with becoming Special Forces. First, you wanted to be a Green Beret. Then you came across the book Rogue Warrior, and you decided you want to go to the SEALs. Now, I never did, but after I saw the movie Navy SEALs, I really was thinking in that direction. But you always wanted to do that. That was what your goal was to do.
Yes, starting from very early age, like it was always playing Army. And once I learned what the Green Berets were, I was like, oh, they're the best of the best. So that's what I want to do, and this is where I want to go. And that's kind of how I led my life. I knew that would be my end state, would be in some sort of special operations. And then, of all things, I was going through driver's ed, as you do in Texas at JCPenney's. Yeah. And you walk the mall at lunch hour, and I was walking through the bookstore with my buddy, and there's this book of this hard looking man, staring back at me from the book cover, and founder of SEAL Team 6. I'm like, well, I ought to read this, and I could not put it down. I was driving, in the bus to football games. I played at Plano East, and we're driving to a game, and I just would not put the book down. Like, they're like, all right, get off the bus. I'm like, ah, shit, I gotta go. But once I was done reading that, I'm like, okay, that's settled. I know where I'm going to be.
You and I were talking, and you said that you had you were listening to the JT Patton episode, and we were talking about, at one point we had mentioned, could they get someone that's used to these foreign dignitary parties? Could they do the job out in the field, and then could you get these guys from the field to do these foreign parties? It's what strikes me strange about you. And a lot about you. You're a huge guy. You are very much primal, and we talked about it with the hunting and all that kind of stuff. But you're almost a Renaissance man. You read, you do music, you build things. That is what I think sets these special soldiers apart from everyone else. Have you found that your whole life that's always been kind of that way? Because you just kind of explained it, where you said, I'm on the way to a football game and I'm reading. And people think, like, who the hell reads on the way to a football game? But you did.
Right. That could be the highest compliment you could pay me, is to say that I'm a Renaissance man. I'm not there yet, but one day maybe I will be. I remember learning that concept in high school, and I was like, that is something that rang true to me. I was like, you should be able to change your tire, change your oil, make beef bourguignon. You should be able to do, all these different things. You should be able to speak eloquently and also say fuck, shit, and damn in the same sentence with, religious fervor. It just, that is how I've kind of modeled my life, was to learn different things. And, I take a lot back from, Seneca, where he's like, you need to be bettering yourself every day. Take away one quote, one new fact, and always make yourself better every single day. And that's what I have tried to do. And I feel like when you stop trying to better yourself is when you really start dying.
Well, and we're going to go into this a little more, but let's kind of point at it now when you say that, when you stop trying to be better. What I've noticed in law enforcement, and from talking to guys in the military that have gotten out and retired, and then seeing guys in law enforcement retire, what I see happen is they give their whole lives, they give 20, 25, 30 years to this career, to this goal, to this mission, and they retire, and 4 months later they're dead, or they're sick, or they don't know what to do, or they're they're bad into the bottle or on pills or whatever. It's a epidemic that we're going to talk about, which your charity helps out with. But how do we get that across to our guys getting out of the military? Because I think that message is very much, even to this day, very much lost on our guys getting out. They're, thank you for your service. We're going to replace you. Move on.
I can't speak to the other branches. The SEAL teams have done a really good job with creating a transitional phase. So the message is resonating a little bit, but there's still a lot more we could do. And I think that's where the nonprofits come into it. You know, when you exit the military, there is this program called TAPS. It's a transition assistance, something or another. And the only thing I got out of that class was I built my resume while I was there, and I subscribed to LinkedIn, and it lasted a week. So there wasn't. I probably bought way too many things on Amazon just sitting there bored off my ass because it wasn't relevant, and it was not geared towards special warfare types. It was maybe geared towards some guys who were getting out of the service that had done 10, 15 years, probably hadn't seen any combat, and they're just, here you go. So at least they're working on that a little bit. But you did hit on something that's very important to me, which is, like you said, why we created Tier 1. And it's like when you get out and you lose that sense of drive, that sense of purpose, the Japanese, I think, called it like ikigai, where it's like if you don't have a drive in life, like that's when you're just going down the drain. And that's something that's very personal to me. I've only transitioned a year, not quite a year ago now. So I was afraid of that. I was a little afraid when I got out, I was going to find this lack of drive, this apathetic, look to life. And I didn't, thankfully. And I feel wonderful. And I'm so glad I'm out and able to, create the charity and coach rugby and all that. But that's my ikigai, that's my drive, is helping others, through this.
Do you think that is in due part to having a supportive wife, having a supportive family behind you?
Absolutely. Without, them there to be my, my shoulder to cry on type thing, it would just be, I can't imagine it. I know guys have gotten out, they're single, they're divorced, their kids moved away, they get out, they lose that drive. And like you said, they hit the pills, hit the bottle. They just become, shells because one of the problems is people tie their identity to being a SEAL, being a police officer, being a SWAT member, or whatever it is. They tie their self-worth to that. And I was afraid of that as well when I got out. I was afraid that my wife even asked me, she's like, well, when people ask you what you do for a living, are you going to kind of cringe when you can't say I'm a SEAL, which I normally didn't say anyway. But it's one of those things, you kind of get a pound your chest. You're like, yeah, this is what I do. And I was like, I don't think so, but that's something I need to be aware of is my self-worth tied to my identity as a SEAL or as a preacher, or X, Y, and Z.
Well, so how do you think we get past that? Not necessarily saying you or me, but the normal guy that's getting out that's not really thinking about that, because I think that a lot of people are really thinking when they reach that retirement age is, what do I got to do to get past this? And it was kind of brought up. There was a guy that I worked with that retired today, and another guy that had retired probably a year and a half ago shows up to it. And he tells me and the guy standing there, he says, don't ever pick your retirement date. Have someone else pick it for you and make it a surprise, because the day you figure out the day you're going to retire, that's all you focus on for the last 6 months, year, whatever it may be. And you need it to become as a surprise. You need to let it kind of happen organically for you, because you might miss out on something before that happens. And I think that's generally what a lot of people think when they're getting out. They're just ready to start that next chapter. But when they turn the page and they get to that next chapter, it's empty.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting concept, to be kind of surprised by your retirement date. I like that. Although it wouldn't work with the military lifestyle. There's so much paperwork you have to just plug in with that exact date. But to answer your question, how do we get past that? A lot of it, I think, just has to be education, and not just like your classical military education or even from university. Is something that we need to bring up and talk to guys with about, tying self-worth, to their identity, and having that that plan for life afterwards. All these guys in spec ops and SWAT teams, they're driven. They're they're alpha personalities. They're driven folks, and they need something to keep driving with. Otherwise, they go down into some bad areas. So that's something I think frank conversations is probably the first step. If something can be created where you come in during those transitions, especially, we have the big Navy transition, which was next to worthless, but then having another one that's centric to, SEALs, SWIC, or EOD, and specifically the guys that fought in the war for the last 20 years.
When we talk about those guys that have fought in the war for the last 20 years, you did an interesting thing that I talked about. Now, we're going to go back to your college, but you not only finished your associates, you finished your bachelor's, and you finished your master's, some of those while on deployment. I don't think that a lot of people look at education as being as important as it needs to be in life. They focus on, once again, that career, that job, and they don't look at learning around them. I always tell my daughters that no one can ever take away how smart you are. That's the one thing they can't take away from you. How important is education to you with these guys?
It's hugely important, and that was one of the things for my last deployment. I was telling you that we got a lot of our guys signed up for, just some online courses, utilizing their tuition assistance, working through the bureaucracy of getting, the Navy to pay for your classes. And we got a lot of different guys signed up for schooling. And, I didn't want to, drive it home to them too many times because you stop listening after, so many times. But I definitely would talk about like, hey, like education is key. The Navy's going to pay for it. And you need to take advantage of the military for all the different programs they have, because they're sure as shit going to take advantage of you for everything you have.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, I want to go back to kind of the college thing. Now, I've always laughed when I talk to you. You left college with 3 hours left to join the Navy. You had one class left, but the drive was just killing you too much, and you had to go. So you go on your first deployment, you finish your bachelor's, correct?
It was at the end of my first deployment. We turned around and I actually got my degree on the second deployment. But yeah, it was a quick turnaround. But yeah, I finished it while I was on my first in Iraq.
And then while you're finishing your last class, your team is actually getting mortared, and you had just been mortared, and you're talking to the teacher about finishing the class up and graduating. First question is, if you would have stayed in school, you would have finished, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You could have been an officer. You could have been a cake eater.
Mm-hmm.
Does it change for you? If you finish, do you still go the route you did, or do you go officer and maybe not special forces, any kind of special operations, Navy SEALs, anything? Does it maybe change for you?
I don't believe so. I had met a SEAL that was going through school when I was there. He was from SEAL Team 4. I'd see him at the pool once in a while, and we'd chat just a little bit. He wasn't very open with me about discussing much. But he basically gave me the best piece of advice. He's like, you want to do the job of a Navy SEAL? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you want to be a sniper, breacher, JTAC, comms guy? You want to be the guy beating the door down and then making entry on bad guys? I'm like, absolutely. It's exactly what I want to do. He's like, then don't be an officer. So that really took me aback. I'm like, maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm like, okay, it really hit home, especially after reading Marchenko. You're hearing all these crazy things he did as an officer. Like, officers must be doing some crazy cool shit out there. But that was the best piece of advice. So when I got in, I still had that idea, like maybe I'll do 2 enlisted deployments and I'll go officer route, and then I'll do that. After the first deployment, I'm like, no, like enlisted is exactly where I want to be, regardless of my education level or anything else.
Do you think, knowing that before you finished that class, do you think that went into part of your decision to leave and go in the Navy?
No, I don't think so. I think the drive was I was being pulled there. It was gravity. I could not fight against it. It was just, this is what's happening. We're going to do this. I'm going to enlist and I'm going to get going. And my college career was fine, but I always was thinking about the teams. There was nothing else I really was, I don't think I enjoyed my college experience to its fullest because I was constantly thinking about, hey, I need to be training. Need to get smart. I need to make sure I'm ready to roll and get going with going in the teams. Just getting past that buds, monolith that's in front of you. Just like, God, I've got to get past this thing. Like, I don't care how, I've got to get past it. So sooner rather than later, it has to get done. So I just said, fuck it, with 3 hours left. It was a philosophy class, um, which I actually really enjoyed when I finally sat down and looked at it.
I can see
instead
that.
instead of just poo-pooing it and just like, it's philosophy. What do I care? This doesn't affect my life. This doesn't affect the things in front of me right now. So fuck that class. Let's go and let's get into the teams. And then, finally was like, I probably ought to finish that because there's just like one thing I haven't accomplished. I need to at least get that degree done.
If I think that I know one thing about you, though, I think that class now probably meant more than a lot of the other classes that you took.
Absolutely. The classes, I'm a criminal justice major, so I really enjoyed the idea of criminal justice and laws and tactics and all that. Not that they get into tactics overly. But the two classes I probably enjoyed the most were art. It was art history and the philosophy class. The rest of them I just feel like were just filler. I think they made me really think.
I think art history was one of my favorites too. One, for I like art, but also there's no wrong answer in those classes. It's whatever you think the answer is. It's a little hard to argue with what someone feels art is. So I did always enjoy those classes though, because they give you the ability, and I think it probably paid off for you in the military, to be more of a free thinker than set down a path and you have to go this way. You're always trying to think outside the box.
Absolutely. I think a lot of my life I was kind of like on that straight and narrow rule follower, didn't think out of the box as much as I would have, liked to admit, as a kid. I think it was kind of, everything was very black and white. And then as I progressed and got in the SEAL teams and started, okay, now I really need to be more of a free thinker, and do my own education. I think that's where that really came in, was like, okay, I've had a university experience. I've had the high school experience. I need my own education now, which would be, reading and exploring art on my own, not inside of a classroom setting.
Now, talking about your career, as you leave college, you go into the career. Now, you have something special about your career. You got to see before the GWOT era. It wasn't very far before it, but you saw before it. And what I've heard guys say before 9/11 happened that went in, and SEALs that have went in and said that they were worried. They looked around and they saw some guys that had been in for 15, 20 years, and they'd been once, twice to do something, and they were really worried, like, oh man, I might not ever get to do anything. Then of course 9/11 happens, the global war on terror happens, and then you guys are busier than you can even schedule in your books.
Yeah.
Let's talk about before and after. Now I know it was a short time, but let's kind of talk about how the military felt in those times.
Absolutely. And it's something funny that struck me with Mr. Patton on your podcast was calling it GWOT. In the military, it's the GWOT. And so every time he said it, I'm like, God, what acronym is he talking about? And finally, I'm like, oh, the GWOT. Oh, I thought it was some intelligence gathering acronym that I had no idea what it meant. But yeah,
we'll go with that.
But as I got to my first SEAL Team 1, Delta Platoon, disillusioned to say the least. First arrived, no one had seen combat. The only guys that really seen anything were from SEAL Team 3. They did some boardings, off the Persian Gulf. No shots fired. It was, my deployment to be looked like going to Thailand, Guam, the Philippines, and really not doing anything. And that really didn't sit right with me. I was like, they're discussing Thailand and all the things that come with that, the different liquor and experiences you can get there. And I was like, that's not why I joined. I didn't join for that. I joined to go to war. Of course they look at me like, yeah, well, so did everybody. And, I'm not special in that regard, of course, but there was disillusionment all the way up until even post 9/11. I was sitting on weapons watch, Camp Pendleton, and watching the planes, fly into the towers.
Right.
And even right then it was like, we're going to war. Like, not great, but this is what we signed up for. This is what we're doing. We're going to war. That platoon went to Guam. Yeah. So it's like, what value added are we in Guam?
Well, so let me ask you. So when you see that, you and I had talked about that a little bit, and you were kind of watching the TV and you saw it. You think that, hey, we're going to war. Do you ever think at that moment, and I know you probably didn't, but we're going to be at war for the next 20 something years? Or did you think we're going to go over there, do our job, and we're done with this?
I was thinking something more like Operation Just Cause or Urgent Fury. Like we're gonna go in, punch them in the dick as hard as we can, try to set up some semblance of a government, and get out. Yeah, definitely didn't see this being my entire career. 20 years of, hey, we're at war.
So, in saying that, is that a good or a bad thing? Because you wanted to do, but then you kind of maybe reached that level of, I guess you would say, burnout. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but 20 years is a long time.
It is. It was a good thing for what I set out to do. My intentions were I wanted to go out and I wanted to lead men in battle as their chief. I wanted to see Afghanistan. I wanted to see that countryside. I wanted to fight the Taliban. So all that was a good thing. And as we were wrapping up my final deployment, it was really winding down. There wasn't not a lot going. So I think it was about the exact. I could not have planned out my career any better. If I had the puppets and I was creating my own life for theater, it wouldn't change much from what I did there. It was about the right amount of time.
That's a good thing to hear, because some people say it wasn't enough time, or some people say they wish they could do more. Some people say they wish they could do maybe a little less time.
It's funny. I think I've got my fill. And that's one of the things people have always asked me. Like, did you, are you happy now that you're out and you feel like you're missing out on something? I'm like, no, not at all. Like I had a magical career. I got to do all the things I wanted to do. I wanted to go out to development group. I never quite made it out that way, just due to circumstance. And, I would have liked to have done that, but I don't feel slighted in my life for not going. And just when you get down and sit with some of the guys that have done other deployments, and then they talk about your deployment, they're like, God damn, how did you do that? How are you in the Philippines and you got in an ambush?
Well, like, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. Like that kind of stuff doesn't happen very often. It's almost like, for a while, it's kind of a magnet. I think that, just wherever I was going to be spicy. I told my boys that when we hit Afghanistan, I'm like, it's going to be spicy where we are.
So I want to point out something. You see the pictures that we're posting up here, right? You can see them on your screen too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Young me.
I noticed something in looking at your pictures. I noticed that you kind of look like someone. So I did a side by side, and I want to see if you agree with me. So we see this picture right here. Okay. Now I'm going to change it to this one.
Oh, I was expecting either Chris Farley or Matt Damon, so that's much better.
you can see it, right? I'm not
yeah,
crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a handsome man there.
But I was looking through and I noticed when you look back at these photos, and you got some great ones that you sent to me. I'm going to show them all throughout the show, but you have these great photos and these things that you did. When you look at a photo like this, because I know from law enforcement, I can look at a building or maybe a location in the city and remember something that happened there. When you look at a photo like this, does it all come rushing back to you?
Yeah, I can smell that tent.
Really?
I can smell the dust and the rat droppings. We always trying to capture the rats on some hydrogel that we use for breaching. Yeah, I can. There's a chair off to the right that was just dingy as could be, and I can kind of smell the entire thing.
So, now this one looks different than all of your other pictures. This one you look different. I almost think that this one is maybe further into your deployments.
That was the same year as the other one. We were doing direct action missions out of Al-Assad, heading into Fallujah. We're going all the way out to the Syrian border in Korean village. We were hitting Ramadi. We're just doing our thing, doing what SEALs are supposed to do. We were unilateral. We had no other Iraqis with us, so it was just us, which was a great time. Then we shifted and became the PSD element for the vice president of Iraq. So that's when we first got to Baghdad. I don't think we had slept in multiple days. We were told basically by the State Department, hey, you're protecting The vice president, he's Kurdish. No one likes him, obviously, because he's Kurdish. Everyone's going to try to kill you. We haven't slept. It's hot as shit out. And that was the picture that was taken. It was like me, just like, fuck.
Well, let's talk about that, because I brought that, I wrote that in for the next thing to talk about when you go to Iraq. So you're assigned to protect the vice president of Iraq. When this information comes to you, that's more of a protective service thing. Do you think that that's taken away from that direct action that you're doing, or by them telling you everybody's going to try and kill you, everybody's going to try and kill him? You're like, well, fuck it. Whichever way we go, we're going to get into some battles.
No, it was a letdown. In fact, I think it was one platoon from the East Coast, which SEAL Team 2 was there, and one from the West, if I'm not mistaken, were assigned protective duties. And, we're on chat or whatever it was back in 04, talking to our buddies like, ha, sucker, go protect these guys. And we're going to be out, killing bad guys. And then 45 minutes later, if that, oh, guess what? Pack your shit, folks. We're out of here. And no shit, I've never seen assets move that quickly. There's these black C-130s landed in Al Assad, and they're like, grab your shit. We drove our vehicles on board. They were all the armored ones we had. All of our gear was on it. They're like, stay in your vehicle. Don't get out. Shut the fuck up. And off we go. Landed Baghdad. And then there we went straight into protective detail after maybe 2 hours of protective training. We had to get the driver set on how you're supposed to be driving that way, how the diamond, the inner and outer perimeters worked. And they're like, figure it out on the fly. And your boy is landing at HLZ Washington in an hour. So good luck. So it was a letdown. It was a challenge, which I appreciate, especially for our leadership, looking back, wow, they really had to jump through their ass to get this done. It was a great challenge, but it was taking us away from that direct action mission, which is what we signed up for, blowing the guy's door down with a large amount of explosives, ripping him out of his, house and, 4:00 in the morning. That's what we really wanted to do, but it was still an experience, and it still has plenty of fun stories of just crazy shit that happens when you're working PSD in Kurdistan, drinking scotch.
Well, so with that, how long are you on that detail?
That was probably 4 months. I think we had 2 months of direct action missions. Then we pushed off to Baghdad. Maybe 4 or 5 months.
I think what a lot of people want to know that weren't over there or didn't work those kind of jobs, how were you guys treated from the people that you're protecting? Are they happy you're there? Are they don't want you there? What's kind of the feeling over there? Because I don't think that's something that gets across in the news. They just see what's going on, not necessarily the feelings of the people behind it.
Now, are you asking as far as the guys we're protecting, or as far as the general population?
Well, let's first do the people that you're protecting, and then we go into the general population.
So the people we're protecting, that was Roush Shawways. He's a Kurdish politician, very well connected, lives in the smallest, hut there is for a vice president. But he was extremely grateful. He's a Kurd, so he didn't have the same animosity that some of the president and the other vice presidents and the prime minister may have had towards the other guys. The other guys were, really pushed off and not really, there was no friendliness with them at all with the other principals, as they're called in protection. The other principals didn't seem to have a lot of interaction, but with Roush, we all had plenty of interaction. About every 2 weeks, we'd fly up to Kurdistan, go to his personal vineyard, where he had this beautiful cave in the side of his mountain full of wine, and he put on a massive barbecue for us. He had a belly dancers for us one time when we were leaving, and there was a warm relationship there. He's a very stoic individual, which I appreciate. You didn't see him smile too often, but when you did, it was very genuine, and it was good to see. So it didn't feel quite like family or anything, but it's like it was a warm relationship with Roush and with his family. Sometimes his kids came out and they jump in the car with us.
Well, it's good to hear stuff like that. Especially, it's funny. It's funny how you always ended up where there was good food, good liquor, and a good time. Let's talk about that though. When you go to a place like that and you see this cave, where this guy lives, and he's got all these wines and everything, it's got to be kind of blow your mind a little bit to see everything, especially at the level you guys are seeing it at that micro level, of all the transgressions that are going on, all the difficulties that are going on in that world. Then you fly there and you see a completely different world. It's got to kind of turn you on your top a little bit.
A little bit. It's looking back on it, it's surreal. At the time being, I think we were so locked on to what we were doing. I don't think we recognized what we were experiencing. But when I look at it in hindsight, I'm like, that was, a remarkable experience. Like you said, sitting in the cave, or there was a bunch of, local women who were crushing the grapes with their feet, to make the wine. It was very, I was like, if we didn't have a vehicle here, we could just pretend that we were in the, late 1700s. There's not power, there's not anything. It's just like I said, it's very surreal where we were. We actually went up to the president of Kurdistan. His name's Barzani. We went to his place, and I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. We pulled into our parking spots, and we got the vice president out. We moved tactically and get him inside and all that. And there's an H2 Humvee sitting there, which they were the hotness in '04, and it had Texas tags. I was like, what? I'm in the Matrix and something glitched. This has to be wrong. And I met the gentleman inside, and he lived in Texas. And after the invasion and, somewhat peace was resolved in Iraq, he took his Humvee and went back to Kurdistan and worked with the president. He's like, oh, yes, we have two Humvees in all of Kurdistan. I have one. I'm like,
so I guess he just kept the Texas plate just to let him know,
Absolutely. I wish I had a Texas flag on me. I would have just flown that off. It was an antenna or something. We did that in Afghanistan. We just throw the Texas flag up there for fun.
So the wine there, compared to the wine that you have now, does it? And the reason I ask this, I know it sounds like a dumb question, but you just pointed out that it was such a surreal moment when you're there and you drink that wine. And now when you think about it, does it hit you differently? I talked to a guy a couple weeks ago that when he very first became a police officer in New York, his father brought him into a steakhouse that was connected to the hotel that he managed. And he says that the night that he got all of his friends dinner, he can still taste that steak to this day when he thinks about it. Same thing with you on that?
No, I wasn't quite a wine aficionado at the time. That was probably one of like 3 glasses of wine I probably ever had. I appreciated it, and I'm trying now that you mentioned, I'm trying to like look back on it, and I can't for life tell me it tell you if it was sweet or dry or earthy or anything. I just recall the picture. All of us were sitting in the cave, um, you know, had our M4 slung, civilian clothes, and all had a glass looking quite proper. I recall that, and then that can bring me into the state where I can almost smell that cave again, and kind of the dampness and how much cooler it was in there, the Kurdish outside.
Let's move forward to 2005, over in the southern Philippines, namely the 24th and 25th of November. Now, you guys were accompanying the 53rd Infantry Battalion on Operation Shadow. So first you can explain what Operation Shadow is.
To the best of my recall, it was a way to basically cut off the Abu Sayyaf group. That was one of the main terrorist groups down there, along with the Jazlama Islamiyah. So the Abu Sayyaf group were on Holo in a central area. It was called Mount Tumatongas. And they're very central to that location, and they basically wanted to squeeze them from all directions. They had naval ships with naval guns kind of in a horseshoe around that side of the island, and then they're just going to patrol through and try to squeeze them to a point that they get stuck and then get eradicated.
Because I don't think people look at I think the general public looks at Iraq, Afghanistan. That's where the main stuff is going on. Iran, Syria. They don't think about the Philippines and other of these areas where these groups are running through and kind of building up little tiny armies and stuff. Can you kind of talk about that? Because I really don't think that a lot of people know about those kind of groups that were around. And if you said you were in the southern Philippines, they'd be like, yeah, so what? Who cares?
Right. I think everyone thinks the Philippines is Manila. And there's quite a bit to that. I can't remember how many different islands there are. It's an astronomical number for one island country to have. But yeah, I mean, everyone was focused solely on Iraq and Afghanistan. and no one was paying attention, at least in the media and in the public didn't really understand that there was a very four prolific terrorist groups in the Philippines: the JI, Abu Sayyaf group, MNLF, and the MILF, which everyone loves to talk about the MILF. That's the Moro Islamo Liberation Front, but they have a funny name. So you had these four different groups, yeah. And I'm so thankful I haven't had a TBI moment I can recall the different acronyms, but yeah. So
hey, listen, you told me that you might not do that well, and I think you're doing fantastic so far.
Thanks so much, but yeah. So down in the Philippines, you have these four main groups who are kind of vying for power. What they want to do is separate the southern Philippines from the rest and create what they call oh, there we go. It's basically the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, or the ARM. So that would be a separate country altogether. They want to basically move away from being part of the main body of the Philippines. Because you got to think most of the governing bodies, most of the politicians are all from the north, and that's Luzon, that's Catholic, and these are all about 99% Muslim down there, and they're Islam came to the Philippines, I believe, in the 1500s, and most people probably wouldn't know that. Their first mosque was like 1533 or something around there. So Islam has been there in the southern Philippines forever, and they have some of the same radical ideologies as bin Laden and everyone else. A lot of people from the Philippines went off and trained in Afghanistan with the Taliban, with Al Qaeda, and then brought those techniques and tactics back to the Philippines, which kind of leads into the story on the 24th or 25th. We didn't know what kind of tactics these guys were hip on.
Well, whenever you go in there and you are seeing this for the first time, the big problem that you kind of pointed out to me was that there was like serious deficiencies in tactics and kind of just knowing how to, I mean, the way you describe it is just knowing how to move, be in the military. I mean, these guys smoked and joked a lot. They sat down, there was all kinds of things that they were doing wrong. So as you come into that and you see that you're going to have to train these guys, because this is a war that has gone all over the globe now, what are your first thoughts? Because you, as a trainer, especially, and an instructor, you have to be looking at this differently than everybody else.
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of paint you a quick picture of how this all came to be, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We started off doing a logistics run, and I was with the Green Berets at this time. I got put in a team guide timeout for a hot second for pissing somebody off, and they put me with a bunch of Green Berets from first group who were awesome stand-up dudes. And we're just doing a logistics run. We're dropping off MREs on this hilltop. And while we're up on this hilltop, they're like, hey, if you want to watch, there's a battle going on down in the jungle below us. And I'm a huge history buff, by the way. And so there are Sky Raiders, which is a prop-driven close attack aircraft. If you ever seen Flight of the Intruder, they talk about Sky Raiders.
Oh, yeah.
So there are Sky Raiders. They're doing these gun runs with OV-10 Broncos marking targets, and these are coming in. Then I've got UH-1 Hueys, doing circles on the battlefield, and they've got little birds flying around. It's just like, I'm like, I'm watching Vietnam in front of me right now. They're calling in arty strikes. It's just like, I was like, where the fuck am I right now? I'm watching a Sky Raider, an OV-10 Bronco call CAS, close air support. I'm like, that's crazy. And then we decided to camp out that night up there on the hillside and hang out. Me and this master sergeant from the ODE team. And then the next morning, they're like, the commander on the ground is an 06, I believe, and he would like a C2 node of Americans. And I was like, I don't know what the fuck you mean. He's like, well, because of his rank, he's allowed to have Americans on the ground right there at the battle to advise him. I was like, oh, shit, that sounds like something. So we get into a slick, we fly out, get dropped down into a schoolyard, get picked up by a half track, and we go through the jungle. We get out, and there's a dude on a horseback with no saddle. I was like, again, there's a glitch in the matrix. I don't know what the fuck was happening. And, we're standing there all tall and proud, got the rifles up, hanging out. And, the colonel's kind of down low, and he's like, oh, we've had an experience with the enemy. I'm like, sir, where's the enemy right now? He's like, oh, 150 yards up that hill. I'm like, God damn it. Like, immediately sought cover, felt like an asshole. You know, it's like, damn, like, okay. So the bad guys are on top of this hill. They have the high ground, and we're just sitting here. I'm like, neat, cool. And then, you know, the master sergeant pulled me over along with the 2 other Green Berets I was with, and we're like, these guys are all Muslim we're dealing with. Like, the good guys, the bad guys, they don't speak Tagalog. These guys speak Tausug. They probably don't want us here. They probably see us as a threat. And I'm talking about the good guys, the 53rd IB. And I'm like, okay. He's like, so just watch your back. And we're going to go on patrol, and we're going to see what we can do for these guys. So I'm like, okay, you know, sir, where are we going now? He's like, well, we're going to clear the Busef's headquarters on Holo Island. Like, okay. So that's what we're doing. Cool.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. We proceed on through. This does circle back to the poor soldiering skills, but as we're pushing through, we get through the headquarters. Nothing happens. There's nothing going on. I cleared all the buildings with the Green Berets, mindful booby traps, and all that. And then I see this big mound of dirt that's very freshly dug, which is a high indicator of an IED. And I grabbed their EOD guy. I'm like, hey man, come here, like take a look at this. And he just steps on it with all of his might. I'm like, what the fuck? He's like, it's fine. I was like, if you ever do that in front of me, I'm gonna fucking kill you. Like right now. I was like, don't do that. And he kind of like gaffed it off kind of thing. You know, I'm sure there's a bit of a language barrier. He had a little bit of English. I was like, okay, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with that level of, they don't have any fucks to give. You know, it's very prominent in the third world. You know, I don't think life is nearly as precious in some people's eyes there as it is with Americans or with first world countries.
Can I stop you for just a second?
Absolutely.
So from a training standpoint, because you're there as an advisor, but you're also kind of training them. And when you realize that, like you said, there's 0 fucks to give, how do you approach something like that? Because they don't give a shit if they learn.
Humor and also just hypervigilance, just making sure that between the Americans, we're like, hey, if anything happens, we have each other. You know, I didn't know these guys, hardly at all. We just met, maybe a couple weeks prior. I'm like, we have each other. We're going to make sure we all get out of here. And that's our end state is we're all going to leave together, and we're all going to leave in one piece. And trying to train them on the fly. We did help train them on the fly, but I knew that most of that was going to just be bouncing off of them. They will tell you the exact right way to do something. As far as like disabling an IED, there's something called like a remote pull. They get a ton of rope, they pull it off, make sure there's nothing that's a pressure release mechanism. So they could tell you word for word, exactly, damn near verbatim of textbook, how you do these things. But then you go to do it, and they don't do it out of, who knows why. So I knew we weren't going to get through them, but all I was concerned about was the Americans.
I can see, but with you being hypervigilant, that adds a whole new level out there, because you're not only watching you and the guys around you, you're also watching the guys that are supposed to be watching you, and it kind of ends up in just one big circle.
Yeah, and when the gunfight happened, we can get to that in a minute, how that all went down. But when the gunfight happened, M14 gunner behind me cracked around right over my head, impacted, feet from my head, and, I turned around with my M4. I pointed it directly at him, flipped off fire, put it on fire, started squeezing slack on his face. And he's like, oh, sorry. I'm like, I don't believe you, but all right. Like, yeah. That's why I was saying, I was like, the whole Philippine experience is a great thing to talk about, because it's just it's absurd. The entire thing is absurd.
Yeah, I agree. So when we go into that, you some of the problems that you said that you sent to me that you were talking about, you said that they carried their M16s over their shoulders, they grasped them by the barrel. They said no patrol or fields of fire were designated. Lack of diligence by the EOD. We just talked about that with the guy jumping on the possible IED. So how do you you saw the battle going on the day before, and it was a heated battle the day before. I guess I need you to describe how these people act not only on patrol, we kind of pointed out the things that they do wrong, but just how they're kind of paying attention to patrol and how they're paying attention to their surroundings. And then we'll talk about when the 2 command detonates go off.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just talk about them on patrol.
It really looked like they'd been out in the field too long and just stopped caring about life. There wasn't any due diligence on anyone's part, except for maybe the commanding officer. Maybe there's a couple guys that we talked to that were kind of, down with being more tactical, but for the most part, like I said, like you mentioned, carrying the M16 by the barrel over their shoulder, no regard for booby traps or anything like that. And they had 2 tracked vehicles that had 20 millimeter coax, weapon systems on them, fully armored. They're at the back of the patrol. So this is supposed to be an IED route. I'm like, well, why don't you have those up here? And this is way before people were doing, a shape type charge to penetrate armor. This is before that. So I was like, there's no reason why you can't have your tracked vehicles up there. So I went to the tracked vehicle guys. I'm like, why aren't you at the front? In case an ID goes off, they're like, oh, no, back here. We're in the back. So, there was just no rhyme or reason to anything they did.
Okay, so we'll get into it. So after you're on this patrol, you're hit with 2 command detonated IEDs. It's followed by small arms fire and an attack on a village. Bwanza, is that how you call it?
I don't exactly recall. I'd have to look back through that.
Yeah, I think it's the village of Bwanza is what you said,
okay.
But I don't know how to properly say it, so we'll go with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just like the GWOT, it's Bwanza.
Yep.
Okay, so after the blast, security kind of goes tight and everyone kind of gets their head on straight. But then you told me, like, right after that, they go right back to just being normal.
Well, so what initially happened was the detonation goes off and they were daisy chained together, which was something we were wondering if they did that, where they connect one IED to another IED. So if this one detonates, it detonates the other one as well. We weren't sure if that was something that had made its way to the Philippines because we didn't have a lot of experience in this realm. So I was actually talking to the colonel. Detonation went off. It blew us all to the ground. And, I'm just kind of staring at him lying on the ground under this table. I'm like, the fuck was that? And it's funny. The best description of the explosion was, it was the loudest, quietest thing I've ever heard in my life. It was initially just this crack that was so loud as, probably over 100 pounds of AMFO, ammonium nitrate fuel oil, buried in the road. This is a big boom. It's a big bada boom. And it goes off, and it was loud for a microsecond, and then it was quiet. No noise. So I'm just like staring at this colonel under the desk, like almost no noise. Wasn't there ringing? It wasn't like Saving Private Ryan, where it's like, ooh, I don't know what's going on. It was just like quiet, and all of a sudden I could hear it again. And I'm like, did you call in a artillery strike? He's like, no. I'm like, huh. Still not knowing that this was an IED. And then as my hearing, I think, came back even further, I realized that small arms fire is coming from the high ground. And now we're starting to hear the snap, crack, crack. Now it's starting to go. Now we're like, oh, right, this is an ambush. Okay. So it took a, that in my mind, it probably, took minutes, but it was probably seconds that we realized, oh, hey, this is an ambush. And they have the high ground, which is not the most enviable place to be. And then from there, I wouldn't say their heads were screwed on right. They fired in all directions, which we call like a death blossom. They just shot every direction. So the master sergeant and I are really trying to figure out, where is this coming from? Because just everybody's shooting. So I'm like, well, fuck, are we surrounded? Or are these guys just incompetent? And thankfully it was the latter. So, we basically crawled around every guy. I'm like, what are you shooting at? They're like, nothing. I'm like, stop. Okay, what are you shooting at? Nothing. I'm like, you stop. We did that enough to the point we realized it was coming from this one central area. And in fact, a round after the M14 gunner damn near shot me, another round came down and hit right in front of me, threw dirt onto my face. I'm like, okay, here we are. We're right here. This is where our field of fire needs to be. And we started directing the Filipinos to fire in those fields of fire. There, they did a fine job. That was no big deal. They did a good job. The funny part is those 2 tracked vehicles, the 2, heavily mechanized pieces of machinery, those guys were having lunch at the time, had little fold-out tables, and were having some sort of, rice and fish. When the gunfight ensues, They pull their lunch inside the thing, shut the door, and do not turn it on. They don't get the guns up. For all I know, they were still having lunch. And there was a poor bastard infantryman just like pounding on the rear hatch, like, let me in, let me in. No, man. No way, man. Not opening this door for anybody.
Well, let me ask, if everyone is Muslim, bad guys, good guys, everyone, what is kind of what's the idea of fighting over there? Does that make any sense?
Well, it does to rational people like us. But as far as the way I boiled it down for some of my guys, younger guys, I'm like, we're simply a pin in a map, like you'd see on an old World War II movie. They're like, oh, I've got my Panzers here and I've got my Luftwaffe here. We're simply a pin in someone's map somewhere that says U.S. Navy SEAL, like one platoon in the Philippines. That's the only reason we were there. You can call it counter China, you can call it counter terrorist. There's a huge kidnapping thing that was going on in the Philippines with the Busef group. You could call it that, anti-kidnapping. But we were hamstrung so bad by the Filipino government, we weren't actually allowed to do anything. The only reason we went out on that op in Holo at Tumatongas was because some odd loophole in their law said if there was like an 06 on the ground, we could be there. So there really was no true strategy or mission that we're supposed to be fulfilling other than training these guys once in a while. We'd train them up. I actually found a better group that I work with later, another Marine Corps group. We trained them up in CQC and intelligence gathering, and we actually PID'd some positively identified some bad guys and actually made some good work. But where we were at that time, there was no strategic value for our presence.
So in saying that, no strategic value, did what you did over there do any good towards the, I guess you would say, the greater cause?
No, not at all. We were able to actually get some intelligence that helped get a guy named Umar Patek killed, and he was the Bali bomber. So a little bit of that intelligence helped drive another team to help get Umar Patek killed. Maybe we scratched the surface on changing a little bit of the mindset with the guys we were training. But I mean, the smallest, most minute amount did we have any real effect. And even years after years after years of SEALs being there, and we realized this isn't the mission we want to be on, MARSOC took it over. And we're like, oh, thank God, go MARSOC, have the Philippines. And then I think after a while they realized like there's no strategic value of us being there. This is not what we need to be involved with. But there's a little flag in someone's map said MARSOC.
The next question that would come from that, do you think that there are places on the planet, and I don't want to say any in particular, that are just futile? No matter what we do, no matter who we send, no matter what our objective is or our goal is, doesn't really matter.
I would have to say that Afghanistan is probably going to be one of those, just if you look at history. Okay. I think you and Mr. Patton had talked about that, where it's like, look at your history. I mean, who all went through there? Alexander, one of the greatest armies ever, goes through there and gets schwacked. The Mongols came through there. Genghis Khan and his guys came down through there, got stopped. The English, the British Empire, the sun will never set on the British Empire. Well, sure as fuck set there. They never made headroads into these countries like Afghanistan. It's the people, it's the terrain, it's the culture. Do I think we were wrong for invading after 9/11? Absolutely not. Don't want
absolutely.
to give that.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, we needed to punch them in the face multiple times for multiple years. But that place, I don't see how one could ever get in there and fundamentally change how that place exists now.
Well, then, let's use Afghanistan for an example then.
Mm-hmm.
If no one could ever change it, one, why do you think that place is so different from everyone else? Why has it lasted so long? Because that whole area has been around forever. We all know the history, the Crusades, everything that have gone. Why is that place so different than everywhere else?
If I had to take a stab at it, I would have to say it's the terrain. The terrain is Gothic. It's gnarly. It's It's some of the craziest terrain I've ever seen. It's beautiful, but it does not lend itself well to occupying or advancing an army through. There are so many places. If you took a Alexandrian sort of army through there, you're going to be channelized. You're going to be slaughtered. It's just the terrain itself, the harsh winters, the horrible summertime. All of that doesn't lend itself well to some guys from Greece or from anywhere else for that matter. I mean, we can always adapt to our environment, but not as well as they have for centuries. So I think that and just they're a hardy people. They're different than Iraqis. They're different than Kurds. Anyone else I've ever worked with. They are some hardy people, which I do appreciate. I really enjoyed my time in Afghanistan and meeting these people.
Can you tell me how they're different? Can we expand on that a little?
Kind of rednecks versus city folk, I guess.
Okay.
That might be the best way to look at it. These are hard scrabble, folks from Appalachia type thing. They're not going to take shit from anybody. Family is their key. They are very hardy because they've had to be to survive. They don't have a lot there. They have very little. But then when you look at Iraqis, they had a laziness to them based upon partially their climate. They had power. They had they had the niceties in a lot of places, not everywhere, but they had a lot of niceties, and they just were a softer people. Afghans were hard. And we actually had a guy that we worked with. He was a warlord is the best way to describe him. Haji Farid John. And this guy just was maybe 6'4", like ghostly gray eyes, had a gnarled hand from getting it beaten by the Russians. And funniest sense of humor I've ever seen, man. It's just like so cool to meet people like that. But he was hard. I guarantee he could easily be like, he dies, and someone would die.
It's interesting to hear that from the ground perspective of it, especially when you say that, rednecks versus city folks, that they're all about family, they're all about this. But then you look at the dichotomy of that place, and yeah, they're all about family, but there's massive atrocities going on there to the women, to the human trafficking that's going on, everything that's going on. I mean, they're a huge opium producer for the world. I mean, heroin is coming out of there, and they've got their hand in almost every, I guess you would say, criminal activity that's going on right now that's big and kind of has the spotlight on it in the world. And it's so crazy to hear the dichotomy that they are so prehistoric. Can we use that word, prehistoric?
Absolutely.
And at the forefront of the future with everything that they're doing.
Yeah, it's a Paleolithic existence there. It's funny, like you see a small earthen smokehouse outside of someone's house, and I had to ask, I'm like, what is this for? And they're like, well, they smoke the meat because they don't have refrigeration. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like it's very Paleolithic. There's not a lot there. Yeah, they have vehicles and they have AK-47s, and that's at the extent of their amenities. But you're right. There is a dichotomy there with how they treat their women, how they treat their children, which that's just a horrible thing in a lot of different ways. I'm sure you've heard of the childhood rape and things of that nature. So my praise of them doesn't, I don't gloss over those things that
absolutely
are just horrific that do happen, and they do have their opium and they have their poppies and they have all that, and that's such a common thing for them. It's part of their lifestyle. It's not something that's new. This is centuries old. Their production. It's not like they're just getting into it now to turn a dollar. It's something they've done for centuries. We worked with the governor of Logar, and we'd be at his house. We'd be having tea or whatnot, and he'd pull out a black bar of things, and he'd take a little razor blade and he'd cut off a piece and eat it. And we're just kind of staring at him. He's like, "Oh, it's headaches," but he had black tar heroin basically right there, and that was just something very common. He would ingest just when we had wounded from the Afghans, we had militias. These guys weren't regular army guys. These were just militia, good old boys that are out there getting after it on our side of things, trying to keep the Taliban out of their area so they could actually prosper. And they'd come in with a mass casualty event, and they'd be wounded. And before our doc would push any sort of narcotics, it's kind of like looking at them like, hey, ask him if he had any, medicine. It's like, oh yeah, a little opium. I'm like, oh, okay, good. So you've had opium, so now you can't have ketamine. Great. But it was something that just, our Western mind didn't really think about until, a few times that happened. We're like, oh, so the second they get shot, they're kind of like, oh, opium or heroin or whatever they had in their pocket. I'm like,
what was the one from American Gangster? They're using a blue magic out in the field. As soon as they get shot, they're popping a little packet of blue magic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been in their handbook for years.
One more question about Afghanistan. I want to move on to
Sure.
some other things that you did with how we left there. I need to have your thoughts on it. I ask a lot of guys that come on the show, but I need to know from a guy that was there, because what we hear a lot is people ask the question, was it even worth all the time, all the personnel, the money, just these guys over there? The biggest thing, was it worth it?
That's a tough question. I mean, the way we left, no, it wasn't. We could have left so many other ways that would have been better for Afghanistan and for our personnel, and to make better use of our nation's, best soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen and our national treasure. We could have done it so many different ways that would have made it somewhat worthwhile. Somewhat. You're never going to change that place, like we already talked about.
Of course.
But the way we left, like, I don't think you could plan a better fuck up than that. I don't think you could sit down with the best group of fuck ups and plan something worse than what we did.
Okay.
That's pretty cut and dry in my book. There could have been so many other ways you could have done it, and I'm not a strategist, and I don't pretend to be one. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I'm not going to say I am one. But I'm a tactician. That's what I did. I do the small picture tactics, not the big picture strategy. And even from my seat, I can see that things could have been done 100 other different ways than the way we did it.
Then let me ask you, and this might be a crazy question from it, but how did it go so badly? You just said you could get the biggest group of fuck ups in the world and they couldn't plan this out. So how do we, with as much history, with the tacticians that we have, with the intel that we have, how do we fuck this up so badly?
Not being on the ground, I don't want to assume too many things.
Okay.
But to me, it screamed of politics and
Absolutely.
people not telling the highest level leadership, to include the POTUS, hey, this is what needs to be done. We need to be doing these things, not these things. It seemed a lot of, when you're dealing with someone of a very high rank, you tend to tell them what they already know, not what you think is best, or at least that's what a bureaucrat does. So I see a line of bureaucrats all saying, oh no, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be great. And the Afghan army is going to last for months and months and months. It's going to be a tidy withdrawal. It just seems like people are just placating, the Joint Chiefs and, the POTUS, saying, no, this will be great. This is a great idea. So it just seems like, politics got in the way of common sense, which has been kind of the trend since, Korea, especially Vietnam. Politics get in the way of good war.
Yeah, but I almost think, how we talked in the very beginning about a polarization, a fracturing. I think that now more than ever, would you agree? Maybe other than maybe Vietnam, the politics are really what's running the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just on the forefront of our everyday lives, and that was never really the thing. It's like the executive branch, weighing in on things it has no business weighing in on. And it's putting politics at the forefront of our lives, and it definitely doesn't need to be there. I think that kind of started under the Obama administration when, there's the Harvard police officer, stopped the gentleman, and then they had this beer summit. I'm like, why are you involved? Why are you talking about these things? You're not a police officer. You're not a mayor. You're not a governor. You're not in the realm to even discuss these things. So stay out of it and don't chime in. It's not your business. But he's trying to be a hit president, trying to be that guy, So that's one of the things that really thrust it to the forefront. Is these things like that where it's just like, oh, I need a politician, or I need an executive to tell me, what to think, what to do.
Which I think is what happened with the exit of Afghanistan. They made it more about the politics of it and what the president was saying. But I don't want to dwell on that forever. Let's
Sure.
move on. I want to talk about one other battle that you were with in the Battle of Ramadi, where you relieved T.U. Bruiser.
Mhm.
Now, T.U. Bruiser was, according to the internet and different things, the most decorated unit ever. Lots of very famous team members.
Mhm.
When you go in there and you replace a team like that because you relieve them, how is that going in there to relieve that? Is there pressure on you? Is it just business as usual? What's it like going in there and relieving something like that?
What weighed the most on us was how kinetic it was. So, whether they did a good job, bad job, decorated, not decorated, that didn't really matter. It was like, how kinetic is the area we're going into? They had multiple wounded, 2 KIA, one critically wounded that later died during surgery. So, this was a big deal. This was something that we had not seen before in Iraq. There was, onesie twosies, guys dying in different places, but this was in the same area in the same span of time. It's like, we're going to Ramadi, and that really, even the word Ramadi now still just like conjures up memories. Just like, holy shit, that place. And you don't think about it on a day-to-day basis, but then you run across the guy you're there with, and it's just like a flood of images come back and memories. You're like, holy fuck. And you say something innocuous like, place was crazy. Like, yep, that was crazy. All right, cool, man. High five. See you later. But yeah, so it wasn't a huge weight on us as far as like filling Jocko Willink and Leif Babin's shoes. As far as T.U. Bruiser's leadership, it was more, we need to get in, do our job, bring everyone home, and try not to get anybody killed, which was a much bigger burden, obviously, than anything else.
Well, can we talk about, like you said, it was very kinetic. There was stuff happening there that wasn't happening everywhere else. You were having onesies and twosies all over, and this place was different. What made this place different, and what drove that kinetic activity?
So there were 2 huge urban, well, I want to leave out Baghdad. So it was 3 major urban battles, and one of them being Fallujah, which happened in 2004, where I was at for that one. Initially, they did a siege. They sieged Fallujah, and then they declared a ceasefire. And that's where I was there for the ceasefire. I'm like, well, fuck, guess we're not going in. And they allowed everybody out, man, women, and child, that wasn't a warfighter. They're like, if you want to come out, you can come out. You're going to come through our checkpoints. If you're a bad guy, we're taking you away. And that's it. And then whoever's left, we're going to come in and we're going to fight. And that turned into quite the shit show of a fight for those guys in Fallujah. And I think it was 2005. So with Ramadi, they tried something different. They're like, we don't want to do this encirclement, this siege. Like, we're going to go in to the most dangerous area. We're going to build a command outpost called a COP, and we're going to keep doing that. And we're going to keep occupying. We're going to occupy. We're going to occupy. We're going to keep pushing. But when you do that, you're creating bad guys in a 360-degree, perimeter around you. No matter how many different streets you lock down, from any direction could be bad guys coming for you. It's pure guerrilla warfare, and it's a very urban city. We had main thoroughfares. We had 4-lane, maybe up to 8, probably 4-lane roads, maybe bigger than that. So large thoroughfare, large city buildings, huge hospital, and the enemy entrenched. They're like, we're staying. They knew at the time, if Ramadi fell, that was the end of Anbar. So that was like, they called like the gateway, or the key to Anbar province was Ramadi. If that fell, the rest of the Western Iraq was going to fall, and they basically would lose, the momentum they had, or they perceived to have. So that's why they really dug in and were like, we're not fucking leaving, and we're fighting. And utilizing guerrilla warfare, IEDs, rockets, mortars, everything else, they did a damn good job of defending that city.
In their thinking, though, they don't want to do another siege like Fallujah.
Right.
Isn't what they did, though, technically, I mean, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, isn't that just a slow siege?
in a way, but like at least in a siege, you kind of do it. They did like basically an envelopment.
Overwhelming.
They enveloped the entire thing and said, you can come out. And if you stay, you're hostile. So that means as you push through the city, you would push through in a line. You'd be going together with, I believe there's 1 Marine Corps and 3 Army units that were pushing through, and they pushed through together. And that left no bad guys behind you, theoretically, if you did it correctly, because you're killing everything, because they're declared hostile.
Okay.
If you have a weapon or don't have a weapon, it doesn't matter. You're dead. So that way, that's why it's so different between that siege and then this command outpost thing. So if I had a male walking around in the daytime, well, he doesn't have a gun, so I can't do anything about it. Whereas a siege like Fallujah, he's walking around in the daytime post-siege, he's dead.
Can I ask which one's better?
For the overall population, I would assume it's better to do what we did in Ramadi, where we tried to let a semblance of order go on. They could stay in their homes, and you didn't have a mass exodus of people. And one of the theories, if you ever get a chance to talk to Jocko, he probably knows more about this than me. He's such a well-educated man. But it seemed like a lot of the bad guys slipped out of Fallujah and just parked their ass in Ramadi. So they go through the checkpoints. They didn't carry any weapons. They maybe had women and children with them. Then they just got in there. So that's one of the problems with the siege mentality, is you're potentially letting bad guys slip through, and they're just going to occupy new terrain. In fact, that's what happened in the Philippines with Holo Island, is they just moved to another island. And then you do the same thing and they move back. So at least with the Ramadi style, is that we occupied so much terrain, they no longer had freedom of movement, and they kind of on their own were like, all right, fuck this place, we need to find a new place to go, because these guys have it. So I didn't really answer your question. I kind of gave you both sides.
No, and you're exactly right. But I think that, like, when you say when they're just moving through, like when they go out of Fallujah and they go to Ramadi, they don't carry weapons, they go with family. I think that they look at that kind of how they look at law enforcement, where it's kind of, is it worth it? Does the ends justify the means? And they say, yeah, look, we took this whole city. Some of these guys might have slipped away and got to another place, not thinking, shit, we're going to have to fight those guys down the road. They're just thinking, look, we took this whole city, and they're looking at it in, look, we reduced crime in this area. Yeah, you just pushed it to another one.
Yeah,
that's all you did.
Gentrification. You have the gentrification of different suburbs or urban areas where it's like, oh, this place is a real shithole. Oh, look at all these cool businesses that came in and they pushed the crime out, and now it's a safe spot. Well, yeah, next door. They went next door. Like,
right.
You're not solving the crime problem or the militant problem. You just pushed them somewhere else.
And so that's why I kind of ask, which one's the best one? Where do you get my question kind of, I guess, boiled down to the most simple. Where do you get the most bang for your buck?
As far as an American's perspective, looking at it, I feel like you have more control as a soldier pushing through a population deemed hostile.
Yeah.
So as you roll through, anyone I see that's not wearing a uniform of an American is dead. In Ramadi, we were discerning shooters. You had to be. Not only from a moral standpoint, but from a legal standpoint. I don't want to shoot a civilian, end up being pulled back, a la Eddie Gallagher, and being put on trial in front of America for something that I was, not saying that's exactly Eddie's situation, but I'm like, I don't want to shoot somebody thinking they had a weapon system, they didn't, and now I have to possibly, go to a UCMJ or a court martial. In fact, I had that happen when I was in Ramadi. There was talk of me going home due to a guy we shot. It was a clean shot, but the family claimed we murdered him, and we didn't. But the initial reaction from NSW, from the leadership, was we were guilty before innocent, and we were going to go home and we were going to stand trial. And this is right when Haditha was going on, the Haditha Marines, and it was almost like case closed. I'm like, fuck, we just, like, you weren't even on the op, and the guy was like, well, this is a one-way conversation, go fuck yourself kind of thing. I'm like, how do you expect me to do my job and kill bad guys out here and do righteous shoots if you're going to fucking question everything I do. And it was a clean shoot. The Army investigated it. They came back and said, good job. That guy was a major terrorist in the area, and good work. But from NSW's perspective, they had already damn near closed the book on it. Not to go down the side rabbit hole.
No. But you bring up a good point. You can almost co-locate that with everything that's going on in the United States with law enforcement shootings right now. It's guilty before proven innocent. And you've got a problem with people sometimes second guessing themselves. And you can't have that in places that you were, in places that some of these guys are working, and you've put so much emphasis on the wrong that you don't even look at the right anymore.
Yeah, law enforcement has a very unenviable position to be in right now. It's like you clear leather and you're pulling out slack and you're thinking about the second and third order effects of your shoot while you're still in the midst of a gunfight. It's like, oh, what's going to happen to this? Oh, who's videotaping this? What's happening? All the different things I can't imagine going through people's minds. And people oftentimes are like, oh, you're retired now, you're going to be a cop. I'm like, no, why would I do that? I'm not that crazy like you guys. Like, I can't imagine pulling up to a car that run a red light, has tinted windows, and you're going to cite them for running a red light, and you get blasted by a double barrel at the back. Like, you're at a disadvantage as a law enforcement officer. In Afghanistan and Iraq, if I don't like what you're doing, my rifle is raised, my safety is off, and my slack is pulled, and I'm about ready to send it. If you are driving your car too close to me, I'm pulling up, and I'm going to let you know I'm not very happy about it. I might give you a warning shot across your car, or I might put it in the driver's side, depending on what he's doing. Cops don't have that luxury, nor should they. Obviously, we don't want a police state where cops can just run rampant. But God, that is split decision-making skills you have to pull over someone. You're like, oh, guy ran a red light. Okay, no big deal. And then you're getting shot at by multiple directions. Like, no, fuck that. I don't want to do that. I'll leave that to you guys.
Let's put your instructor hat back on for a minute.
It's one of my favorite hats.
I'm going to go law enforcement, but I want you to talk about this. Mm-hmm. When you talk about that, pulling over someone for a traffic stop, or they're pulling out slack and they're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4 down the road of everything that's going to happen to this. That's, of course, a training scar. It absolutely is a training scar. How do we train those out of us? How do you train to think about what's happening right now, not 4 steps, knowing before you get to that first step, you've already thought about you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not even a thought.
I don't think you can train that out of it. I think what you have to do is build an honest discussion with your PD. So with your police department, with your city government, that they're going to have your back, or with your union, however you want to look at it. They have to have your back. They have to go on the officer's side of things. Like, hey, we're not going to assume guilt right out of the gates. We're going to protect you. We're going to do everything we can. But with social media, the regular media, all of that, I don't know how you do that these days. This is nothing we could do on the range. On the range, there are other things. As an instructor, I see guys, they clear leather, double tap, and they get their gun back in their holster as quickly as they can. I'm like, stop doing that. You're putting your gun away quickly. And there are reported cases of guys having a shooter, they clear leather, shot, back in, and the guy's still advancing with a knife. You're like, oh, whoops. They're doing muscle memory. They do what humans do. So, like, you can train those skill sets and those muscle memories, but you can't train trust. You put that in quotations somewhere on the podcast. Can't train trust.
Does this transfer from law enforcement and in the United States over to the military at any point?
100%. 100%. That, I mean, as we saw with Eddie, my scenario, thankfully, wasn't public. And there's been other guys that are just like, they get raked over the coals for something, and they end up being not guilty and being, doing heroic action and doing a great job. And no one apologizes. No one comes out and does a public, retraction. NSW never came out and did a retraction for Eddie. They're not like, sorry, we misspoke and we jumped to conclusions that weren't true. And he was found innocent by, a jury and are bad. None of that ever happened. He's still a pariah among, leadership in the military. So yeah, the overlap is very similar. Unfortunately, what we have to deal with in the military is the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It seems to indicate guilt before innocence, unlike a civil affair as a civilian. And we're subject to double jeopardy as well, so we can be tried both in civilian courts and in military courts. It's a lot of things that just don't sit well with a lot of guys. You're like, this, if you fuck up, you could be looking at a lot of pain, and military jails and military prisons like Leavenworth. That's no joke. I don't think that sit on the forefront of most people's minds when we were doing the work. But after I was talked to about this investigation for this alleged crime, like that sat heavy on me. It's like, well, fuck. Like, are you going to send me home and put me in jail? Because that's what it felt like. And at the time, we're like, if I go home, like I'm going to Mexico. I'm divorced. I'm like, I don't care. Like, fuck. Like, I didn't trust in the judicial system at the time in the military, and with good cause. When I saw Eddie get raked over the coals, I'm like, oh, this is what would have happened to me.
Yeah, and you're right. I had Eddie on the show a while ago, and when we talked about it, I mean, they fucked that guy every way they could to mess with him. The thing that was interesting to me about Eddie and about there was another guy, Keith Berry. I don't know if you know him, but he was accused of sexual assault, and it came out.
Mm-hmm.
He went to prison for 3 years, and then they found out it was all made up. With your incident, all of those things come up. What seems interesting to me is they never seem to focus on the people that are bringing this up. And that's what kind of, I don't know if you'd say pissed me off about the situation, but you have the same thing in the United States in law enforcement. You have these people that are making up stuff, and it came out in Eddie's thing. And you and I haven't talked enough about your thing for me to know all the ins and outs of it. But if you look at Eddie's thing, and all these people came out, yeah, we made that up. Yeah, we did this. Yeah, we did that. And not one of them, the only thing that he was found guilty of was taking the photo with the dead person. And everybody that accused him was in that photo, and not one thing happened to any of them. And it doesn't make any sense to me at all when we're talking about that. You have these guys that are putting it on the line. These other guys, I don't really know about them. All I know is it's very... not very honorable to do the things that they've done, to put those guys through what they went through, and then for no punishment to come. That sets a bad precedent.
It 100% does. I mean, you can see that in our society as well. When someone claims a false racism charge of getting acid thrown in their face, and then get a noose tied around their neck, and the whole thing never happened, and they're still beloved by the media. I'm like, where's the culpability? Where's the responsibility that person has for breaking the law and creating a false charge? And yeah, you don't see it because that's where the politics creep in. And that's, one of the reasons I love being out now, is that I'm free of that political bureaucratic nonsense, that this machine, that's what it is. It's a machine.
Absolutely. And I believe
roll forward.
Absolutely.
They consume everything in front of it.
And I believe, going back to Eddie's thing, I believe that people were trying to make their next star, their next rank. I believe that people were purposely doing things in order to move up those levels.
Absolutely. I've always jokingly, as I've gone through the ranks, I'm like, hey, never trust anybody that's a E8 and above. I'd say that as an E7, as a chief. And then when I made senior chief, I'm like, never trust anybody that's an E9 or above. I always made it one rank above me.
Right.
But it was, I always like to use humor in most things. And it was true though. It's like, I don't trust anyone that's about above an 03, and I sure as shit don't trust anybody that's above an E8. They get consumed by this political rapture. They just get drawn into it. Not everybody. There are exceptions, and I'm sure some of my friends that are higher ranks are going to be looking at this like, what the fuck? Like, right, you're not the guy I'm talking about. I'm talking about the one, who I'm talking about, where they just get ensnared by this rank and by this political structure, and constantly moving up the chain of command. And goes back to, they're the people that tie their self-worth to their identity. No, I'm a master chief. I'm a force master chief. I'm a whatever you call it. I'm there. I'm the guy. They're ensnared by that, and they just can't lose that power. Makes them create this. They have decisions or create policy that is detrimental to us, but it helps them add another star or to keep them moving up the ranks. That's why, you know, I think it was military.com had an article. They're like, most of your good officers get out at 03 level. It's a hilarious article. Almost like they get out as an 03. Either the extreme high performers get out at post 03 level, so post lieutenant in the Navy, because they're going to go to a Fortune 500 and make millions. And I know so many of these guys. Your poor performers are going to be peered out and they're not going to do well. So what you get that rises through the ranks are your middle of the road guys, the guys that just kind of make it. They go with the flow. They're the ones who make admiral.
Get along,
They're
go
always,
along.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always exceptions to the rule. I don't ever want to, cast too wide of a net. But yeah, the guys that get there are the ones that just kind of they're mediocre. I know plenty of officers have gotten through. I'm like, oh, that kind of sucked. No, he's a captain, huh? Okay. I mean, sucked, but didn't suck bad enough to get peered out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure you see that in the police department.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You'll see guys that will test for, let's say, sergeant. Mm-hmm. They'll make sergeant. You have to go a 6-month probationary period after you make that rank, and then you can be a lieutenant. But you don't have to go that 6 months to take the test to be a lieutenant. So you can become a sergeant, take a test for lieutenant the next day, and as long as you make it through that 6-month time period to keep that sergeant rank, you can be promoted to the next rank. And you see it happen a lot. Guys that are just trying to, I've got a guy that 15 years together, he's already a chief. Now, don't think that doesn't make me feel bad about my fucking life, but
really underachieved there.
Yeah, no shit. I really but that's the whole point. It's you either like what you do or you like where you're going. There's campers and there's movers.
I think one of my buddies, what do we call it? Renters, squatters, and owners is how he described SEALs. Squatters, guys that kind of just they go along to get along. It's that shitty officer that somehow makes it to captain.
They want their name on a piece of gear when they get out and say that they were a SEAL. Yep.
Or they want to be a politician. They want to say, yeah, I was this, that, and the other. You renters, you have guys that, mainly enlisted types. They do a little bit of time. They kind of do the job okay. They get out and they go about their business. And then you have the owners. That's the guys that are there. They own it. They live it. They breathe it. They're the ones who are the pure subject matter experts in the job. And that's the owners. That's who we are. That's who the guys you want to associate with, too. In any department or any agency, you want to associate yourself with the owners.
Well, I want to move on after your career, and I want to talk about this charity. And I want to talk about a couple things before the charity and then why the charity is in place. Now, the question that we've kind of danced around the whole time, you did a ton of deployments. You were gone for a lot of your career. Now, were you married the entire time?
I was, but I was married to another woman at the time when I first joined the military. Moved to, I was in Austin, Texas, got married there, joined the military. I did one deployment with her, came home that night to basically a divorce. Was, like, this isn't working out type thing. Like, oh, okay. Was not expected. Didn't see the writing on the wall. Did 2 more deployments, and then after Ramadi, maybe a week later, being in town, I met my current wife. But that was an event that really shaped the rest of my life. I mean, I'd come back from Ramadi, wrecked my motorcycle like the second day, been in two fights already, just going down a slippery slope. Happened to meet her at a friend's birthday party. The day I wrecked my motorcycle, I was still bleeding when I first met her, like literally still bleeding through my pants that I wrecked my motorcycle in. Met her and was like, yeah, here we go. This is it. It really, set me straight.
So I ask all that to ask this.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about having a family to support you when you retire, but you really need a family while you're doing the job. Part of this charity that you do, and the biggest thing that you guys strive for, is to take these guys who are going down that slippery slope like you were. And do you even know why you were going down a slippery slope? Do you have it pinpointed why you were?
Multiple deployments, combat, like back to back to back to back, living fast. Like I said earlier, is like, the third world doesn't seem to put a higher price tag on life as maybe a Western world does. But as you continue to see death, sometimes it starts to degrade a little bit, and you start seeing less value in life because you're taking it, and you perhaps see less value in yourself. But I think a lot of it was just constant movement. I was never home, always going, either doing a workup, doing a deployment, back to doing it again. You just really had no time for any introspection at all.
Like a shark.
I didn't make time for it because I didn't know what introspection was at that point, probably.
Okay, so two things from that.
Mm-hmm.
When you came home to that first divorce and you said you didn't see the writing on the wall, you didn't even know that was coming.
Mm-hmm.
Does that put you on that path? Does that start you on that path where you're like, fuck it, I'm going to do what I'm going to do?
Oh, 100%. 100%. That was the path to self-destruction right there. Is like, cool, well, guess this doesn't mean shit. So, it was also a quick turnaround. It was during the surge. So we did a very fast workup and redeployed, which doesn't give you time to plant your feet and see what's what. So like, well, cool. Let's just, drink a lot of booze and, just not give a shit about much else. You did your workup, you made sure you were there, you trained, you mentored, you did all the things that work. But as soon as you're done, you're like, no drive to do anything else.
So when you meet your current wife,
mm-hmm.
and you say it's a changing moment,
mm-hmm.
that's going from racing in the green or the red constantly to slowing it back into the green. Is there any kickback on that? Any trouble from not necessarily even her, from you changing so drastically?
No, and I love the expression "race car in the red" because that's something we use quite a bit. Is just like you're constantly just pegged at those RPMs, and I was constantly pegged at those RPMs. Met her. I moved to Monterey to do DLI to learn French, of all things, and we chatted. I got my race car back down a little bit, and we decided to buy a house together. We didn't even date hardly. We just kind of talked online, hung out a couple times, and I was like, let's buy a house. She's like, you mean with me? I'm like, yeah, let's buy a house together. That's what I'm sitting in here with the green patch on the wall and the Yoda in the background. And but immediately after we bought the house, I got back into the race car in the red sort of scenario, but with a different mindset. It was framed differently for me. There was hope, there was love, there was an energy that's indescribable unless you've been in love and you understand that. It's just one of those things where I was going back to a workup, back to SEAL Team 1, back to deployment, going back to Iraq, to Al-Assad, but it changed my mind. It was like I said, it was reframed. Now there's someone that
I got to interject though. But
Please.
That first divorce never fucked with you at all about this, because I see that it rearing its ugly head at some point with you deploying with you. It never did?
Oh, no, it totally did. No, that fucked with my head like it's cool. You lose a sense of self-worth, especially when you don't see it coming. It was a sucker punch. It was just kind of like all of a sudden you're like, what the fuck?
No. Right. What I mean is when you're with your current wife, and you're getting ready and you go back over there, you say you're still running in the red, but you have a different sense of purpose. Does the thoughts of this all falling apart, does it ever creep up in your head?
No, not at all. I might be the eternal optimist. It did that never, like when I first went on deployment, I was like, we just got married. I'm like, cool, honeymoon, and I gotta go. That never crept into my headspace.
That's amazing though.
I contribute that to my wife. It was just her energy and her love and everything else. It was just like one of those things like, no, this is where we're supposed to be in time. And never once crept into my being that, oh, holy shit, maybe I need to. I, I knew I needed to slow down to be able to spend time with her, but never did I think once that she was going to, take off based upon my job or my lifestyle or anything else.
Right. So let's talk about those guys with this charity that does, because that creeps into a lot of their heads. These constant deployments, and not even talking about special operators. We're talking about law enforcement, first responders, people that are gone a lot, people with very high stress jobs. How do you guys help them?
So that's one of the wonderful things is, so with Tier 1 Outdoors, it basically was created by some game wardens that knew some landowners that had some other folks that were prior Tier 1 level operators, and they were in a bad way. And it was one of those things like, hey, let's get you out here. There's a fire pit. There's a lake. There's nature, and let's chill and relax and just kind of talk if you want to talk. Don't if you don't. Eat good chow. Tell stories, and commute a little bit with other vets. And that's kind of where it started. Um, and then fast forward a few years, it became one of those things where like, cool. Now we have Navy SEALs. I've got a MARSOC guy. We're getting some PJs involved. Dallas SWAT. A couple other different groups where we have guys who were seen too much, and they need this kind of thing. So it's an amazing creation that the original founders created that allows for guys with disassociated backgrounds, but something still similar, is where I can sit in a blind with a guy who was a SWAT guy and saw some horrific things. One of your previous guests, and we just had the greatest time. We just talk, hang out at the Gentle Whisper. We're telling stories. We're bonding. It's just an amazing experience, and just like relaxes you. You have guys who have similar but different experiences that allow you to create a friendship, but it also allows you to tell your trauma, if you will. Most guys in our lives don't like to say, well, my trauma, but it does. You speak of like, oh, holy shit, this happened. I can't believe I'm still alive, and I saw this guy burning alive. Cool. Oh yeah, I had one of these things where this happened, and you create this bond, and then a deer walks by, and then you shoot it. And you're like, cool, let's go skin it and gut it. Or even if nothing ever happens, there's nothing, no deer comes by, no turkey come by, no nothing. It's the experience of sitting there, and then we go back, and you've made friends for a lifetime because of these shared experiences that you can talk about. I don't know if it's nature itself that allows you just to be more open, but like none of us sit in the blind and just like stare at each other. You create the conversation. Maybe it's the silence, and you just create conversation, and you talk about whatever you want to talk about, and it really sends guys down a good road, to let them explore what they've been through. That's what I love about the charity, and I was so fortunate to get involved with them. When they asked me to be a part of it, I was just like, it's my raison d'être. It's my reason to be. Besides my family, of course, which is my huge reason to have drive, but the charity and to help vets and SWAT cops and narco guys and everybody else. It's like that's my drive. I love getting up and thinking about what can we do next in the charity? What other trips can we do? How can we get funding? What some of the guys like, hey, can we do a cattle drive? Like, fuck yeah, we can do a cattle drive. Let's do a hunt. Let's do a horseback hunt. Let's do snowboarding in Alaska. Let's do fishing. Like anything we can do to get vets, cops together and to talk about anything they want to talk about. We don't guide the conversation like a therapist. We let it evolve organically. I went on a way rabbit hole based upon your question. I just like went on a free.
No, that's what it's all about. And I would say the question that comes from that is, because I don't know. Well, I kind of know the answer, but why don't the guys talk about that stuff?
They do in certain venues. I think some of it could be not wanting to kick anything loose in their brain. Some guys like feel very adapted from their experiences that were traumatic, and some guys just don't want to face it because they don't want to kick something loose and change how they are. I think other guys could be embarrassed at how they responded to an event. Guys don't always respond the way they think they're going to respond based upon their training. Some guys have the survivor's guilt. I think that's a big one too. It's like, I don't wrestle with that too much anymore, but it's one of those things like, well, why did I make it through? Why didn't I get blown up here at this time, or why didn't I get shot here? It's there's a lot of different reasons. Everyone has their own reason why they don't want to discuss it. But in that venue with other vets who have been under something similar, it's a safer space to discuss stuff. They don't couch it that way. They don't describe it that way. Well, you're sitting around the fire and you got some beers and you're just chilling and you're like, oh man, this one time in this cave and this happened. And the guy's like, holy fuck, that's crazy, bro. Like, how'd you get through that? And you dive into things you didn't know you wanted to talk about, and all of a sudden you talk about it.
When you talk about those things, and when you talk about those things with those guys, does it ever spark anything with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's just, flat out empathy, when people are talking about, something that I've experienced that was very similar, I'm like, yep, I understand exactly what you're talking about. And again, they could be talking about a very visceral experience, and it'll conjure up, a smell and a sound, or like, your jaw unlocks. You kind of like get that saliva feeling back here. You're just like, oh shit, wow, I was just right there a second ago, and that's good. It's good. It's good to. I don't want to, suppress any of those, ideas or those memories. I want to be able to confront them and look at them, which is what I want them to do. They shouldn't be suppressing these things. Should be exploring it and talking about it. If they have reservations on what they did, that's a big one. If guys has a reservation on what they experienced or how they performed, or 100 other different reasons why they might second guess what they were doing there, it's good to discuss that. So yeah, it definitely kicks in when they talk about a story. I'm like, fuck, yes, I've been there exactly. Or it might be the opposite. I'm like, fuck, I wish I was there for that. That's awesome. Just depends.
Let's talk about the hunts a little bit. I want to talk about what you've done before, what you have planned for the future, because they're cool. You and I have talked about a lot of them. And then I've worked with a couple guys that have been on them, and they can't say enough good things about them. Alaska, Texas. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about both those first off.
Right. So right now, we're operating on a shoestring of a budget. We're working on the philanthropy of landowners that allow us to come out. Some people donate a little bit of food. We have a chef named Jet Tila that comes out. He's a celebrity chef, and he volunteers his time and cooks for us. So we have almost no budget at the current time, which is something we're going to work on. Start doing fundraisers, maybe around Dallas, Austin, maybe out here where I'm at in California. So it's a shoestring budget, but right now we have 2 annual events. One is a fishing trip up in Thorn Bay, Alaska. We have a gracious gentleman from Glen Rose, Texas, that offers up his lodge and his services and takes us out. And that's one of the most beautiful, mind-clearing places I've ever been to. Just sitting in like the hot tub looking out on Thorn Bay, and a eagle swoops down and swoops up a halibut carcass that we'd just thrown out in the water, and just having a glass of scotch. I'm like, I am here. I'm in the moment, and I'm loving it.
I just wanted to wave an American flag just now. I just wanted to
yes, when that eagle was like and like comes swooping down to grab it. Well, so I raised chickens before here in my suburban home, and chickens have a happy dance. They're kind of like, they do that. Eagles do the same thing, which makes them so less menacing. But this eagle had this giant piece of halibut, and he's like dancing around and he's squawking and having a great time. I'm like, eagle's having a happy dance. That's really cool. But it's an amazing event up there. And then we have one that's down in Glen Rose, Texas, at a ranch. One of our board members, his family owns, and that's I think around 10,000 acres, where we're able to hunt whitetail and hog. Todd Huey comes out, the hog father, and he comes out and lets us go hunt hog, sometimes turkey, duck, whatever it is. Those are our 2 annual events that we have kind of solidified. Hopefully they recur every year, as long as we keep it going. But now we're just trying to create about a 5-year goal, a short-term plan where it's going to be 10 hunts per year or 10 activities. We're not even set on it just being hunting. I'm working on one that'd be a cattle drive out in New Mexico. We're doing a snowboarding trip up to Alaska. The great part about that one is the snowboarding trip is going to be run by the sister and brother-in-law of my best friend who was killed. He was a SEAL, died during a parachute training. So we're going to go up there, snowboard with them as part of the trip. What else do we have? We have some long-range outad hunting out in West Texas. We're going to go to Possum Kingdom for some more outad. The sky's the limit, and basically we're hoping to get the word out to landowners, guides, anyone and everyone that's like understands our cause, what we're trying to do, and then let us come out and hunt on their land and have a good time for these vets to let them open up whatever they want to open up or just relax in nature. And I think it's one of the best medicines there is just getting out away from your phone, the computer, the desk, the family, everything, and just kind of almost forgetting about some of your responsibilities and some of the heavy things in life and enjoy some camaraderie with some brothers and getting out there and just doing some primal skills like we talked about earlier. Like I have adult onset hunting, like I had mentioned. I didn't grow up hunting. I kind of caught the bug later in life. And as I caught the bug, I'm like, God, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to gut an animal that I've shot. I don't know how to take that animal now and process it into something usable for my family to eat. And through Tier 1 Outdoors, I've been able to discover how to do that. And, I even had my little daughter, I think she was 6 at the time, and she's running the grinder in our backyard, and I'm handing her chunks of deer, and she's just stuffing the grinder. We'd bag up the ground elk, and we ate elk tacos for damn near a year. The first time I gave her a beef taco, she's like, elk? I'm like, no, it's beef. We ran out. She's like, oh. The disappointment was audible. I'm like, yes. So she understood. I mean, my neighbor came over, and I've got like a shank on the table, and I'm just like cutting away. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, processing a elk. It's like, okay, all right, we'll see you later.
Well, I think an important part of this organization, something that you guys really strive for, is the privacy of the members. Is your utmost concern. And that even went as far as me and you. I asked you for some pictures and you said, I can't really do that. We don't want to release, who's been on these hunts unless they thought it was cool and stuff like that. And you have to go through all that. And I think that's really important because, like we talked about, people don't want to talk. People don't want to put themselves out there where they could possibly be called out by someone, as crazy as that sounds, but that's why they don't take part in these things. They want to go to a place that's secure, safe, and they know they're not going to be called out for what they're doing and being seen as weak or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we take pictures the whole time. Everyone's taking pictures, and it's one of those things. We're like, hey, these are for us. This is for internal distribution only. I do ask, like, hey, we do have a website. So if you're cool with us putting something on the website, then maybe, we'll throw something up there. But some guys are still active duty, and a lot of SEALs are closed-lipped despite the sheer number of books and media out there about SEALs. Most of us don't want to put ourselves out there. This is my first podcast, and I was still reticent slightly to come on just because this is not what we do as SEALs, is get out there and you're like, yeah, I'm like, thump my chest and this is how cool I am. But it was a venue to discuss the charity, which is way more important than my own ego and discussing things of that nature. So it is great that guys can feel safe when they go out there. We take a photo. Not one guy has been like, hey, you're not posting that, right? They know it. It's in our genetic makeup as the charity. When we at first were like, we need a website, other board members were like, no, that's not what we're doing here. We don't want to put faces out there. I'm like, we don't have to do faces. We can do stock images. We can do pictures with people's backs, nothing identifying, none of our tattoos. We can do it and still respect the privacy of these guys, because that's paramount. If I can't secure their privacy, then they're not going to come out. and then they're not getting the benefit of what Tier 1 Outdoors offers. And same thing with like Facebook and Instagram and all that. We're like back and forth, like, should we make it? Should we not make it? None of us are social media experts, and a lot of us are, in our 40s, and we're not, what would you call it? Social media natives, So it's like we weren't quite sure, but we're like, we can be respectful, we can be private, and we can still be poignant.
How can people help out?
Biggest thing is one, you can go to tier1outdoors.com. That's TIER, the number 1, outdoors.com, and donate there, because that helps feed our guys. That's the biggest thing is right now, we have landowners that grant us an amazing opportunity to hunt on their property, but we still have to feed them, get them drinks, whatever else it is. So that helps us to get them fed throughout the entirety. Our 5-year plan, again, besides 10 hunts or 10 activities, is that we pay for them from door to us back to their door, meaning we're going to cover their Uber to the airport, their flight, their luggage if they have excess luggage, because you're flying with guns, you're flying with coolers, and then when we pick them up, and then all the way back. And that's an expensive proposition when we're flying folks from California, Virginia, wherever, to Alaska. Now, that's where the expenses are really piling up. And right now, the veterans and everyone else, they're having to foot that themselves. Not a single complaint from any of the guys. They love that they get to come out and do these activities for free, but we want to offer more. We don't want to be a strain on the guys that are like, hey, you can come to Alaska. You have to pay $1,000